Welcome. We're diving into a question that sounds a little wild, but it's backed by some really fascinating science. We all kind of know that a chiropractor can help with a sore back, right? But what if it could do more? What if adjusting your spine could actually change your brain? I mean, just pause and think about that. Can a physical adjustment to your spine have a real, measurable effect on your mood, your thoughts, maybe even how you sleep at night? It's a pretty bold claim. For a long time, all we had were stories from people. But what happens when we actually peek inside the brain to see if there's any proof? Well, that is exactly what a team of researchers did. In a 2024 study published in the journal Brain Sciences, they decided to go beyond the stories and hunt for some cold, hard data. So for this explainer, we're going to play detective, follow the evidence, and see exactly what they discovered. So, first things first, we've got to talk about what most people think of when they hear the word chiropractic. For pretty much everyone, it's about physical pain. You know, a stiff neck from staring at your phone, or maybe you tweaked your lower back lifting a box. You go in, get an adjustment, and you hope to feel some relief. That's the basic story, isn't it? But this is where it gets really interesting. For years, patients have been saying they notice other things, like they feel less anxious, they're sleeping better, or they just have this general sense of well-being. So are those things just a nice side effect of being in less pain? Or is something else, something deeper going on in the brain and nervous system? That's the puzzle this study wanted to solve. And to crack that puzzle, you can't just ask people how they feel. You need a proper scientific investigation. So the researchers set up a really smart experiment to figure out what was really happening. Here's what they did. They got 76 people, all with chronic low back pain, and split them into two groups. The first group got 4 weeks of real chiropractic adjustments. The second group, the control group, they got what you might call a sham adjustment. They went through all the same motions, but without that specific final thrust. And that is so important because it helps make sure that any differences they found were because of the adjustment itself and not just from the placebo effect of someone paying attention to them. And to gather their clues, the scientists brought out the big guns. They used EEG caps to listen in on the brain's electrical chatter in real time. They had everyone wear Fitbits to track their sleep out in the real world, not just in a lab. And they used a very detailed survey to get solid numbers on things like anxiety, depression, and fatigue. They were looking at this from every possible angle. Okay, so the experiment is set, the data's collected. Now for the exciting part. What do the brain scans actually show? Let's dive into the clues. All right, clue number 1 came directly from the brain's electrical activity. In the group that got real adjustments, their brains showed a big drop in slow delta waves. Now, when you're awake, too many of these waves can be linked to brain fog. But at the same time, they saw a big increase in the faster alpha and beta waves. Those are the waves linked to being focused, calm, and alert. It's like their brains went from being kind of sleepy to being more awake and engaged. Now, to get the next clue, we need to talk about something called the default mode network, or DMN. The best way to think about it is like your brain's screensaver. You know when you're driving and you suddenly snap back to reality and can't remember the last few miles? Yeah, that was your DMN at work. It's active when you're daydreaming, thinking about yourself, or reflecting. It's really core to our sense of self. And that brings us to clue number 2. The study found that inside that screensaver network, communication got a whole lot better after chiropractic care. The different parts of the brain involved in self-awareness and internal thought, they started talking to each other more effectively. It's like the network got an upgrade. So we've seen a change in the brain's overall rhythm and in the network for self-reflection. The next clue is all about how the brain actually listens to the signals coming from the body. For this third clue, the researchers basically tested the brain's volume knob for incoming information. Before the adjustments, for a small sensation on the wrist, that volume was turned way up. But after 4 weeks, the brain's response was way lower. Now, this doesn't mean the brain was ignoring the signal. It actually suggests the opposite. It was processing it more efficiently, kind of like filtering out background noise so it could focus on what's important. Okay, brainwaves, networks, volume knobs, that's all cool stuff. But you're probably wondering, what does this actually mean for a person? Did these changes in the brain actually make a difference in their everyday lives? Oh yeah, a big difference. Let's start with the Fitbit data. The chiropractic group got a huge boost in their amount of light sleep, and that 20% figure, that's a really significant shift. It's a real-world, measurable improvement in their sleep quality, tracked while they were sleeping in their own beds. And it wasn't just sleep. This quote from the study's authors says it all. The participants themselves reported that their quality of life was enhanced. They had, and this is a direct quote, significant reductions in anxiety, depression, fatigue, and pain. These weren't just tiny little changes, they were big, statistically meaningful improvements. And here is where it all comes together. The researchers found that the changes they saw in the brain, the new brainwave patterns, the better communication in the DMN, the more efficient sensory processing, all of it was directly linked to these real-world benefits. The clues from the brain actually predicted how much better people would feel. So that brings us to our final section. We've looked at all the evidence, from the brain waves to the Fitbits to what the people themselves said. What's the final verdict on this brain-body connection? Well, the verdict really comes down to one amazing word: neuroplasticity. All this means is that your brain has this incredible ability to change and rewire itself. It's not some fixed chunk of rock in your head. Every single time you learn something new, you are using neuroplasticity. It's literally how our brains learn and adapt to the world. And that, right there, is the study's huge conclusion. The improvements people felt in their mood, sleep, and pain weren't just in their heads or some random fluke. The evidence strongly suggests that these benefits were driven by real, measurable neuroplastic changes in the brain. The adjustments seem to be triggering the brain to reorganize itself in a healthier, more functional way. Which leaves us with a pretty massive final thought. This study gives us some powerful evidence that a physical treatment on the spine can create real change in the brain. So if that's true, if the spine really is a kind of gateway to altering brain function, what could that mean for the future? Not just for back pain, but for mental health, for sleep, for our overall well-being. It's an incredible idea to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.